Hello, everybody. Tom Woods here, talking about the FBI today with Ryan McMaken, who joins us once again. Ryan is the economics editor and communications director at the Mises Institute, which, of course, you can visit at mises.org. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
All right. So you got an article on getting rid of the FBI. Now, that is just crazy, crazy libertarian talk, my friend. That just don't make no sense. It's called Abolish the FBI. The FBI is there to solve crimes, to solve crimes that involve people going from one state to another, kidnappers crossing state lines, bank robbers running away, whatever it is. You need the FBI. That just seems like a crazy thing to say. So what's going on today that makes you think there's something wrong with the FBI?
Well, the event that precipitated the article was the FBI's decision to not indict Hillary for anything, not so much as even a misdemeanor. And then they turn around, James Comey turns around and says, oh, well, she did all these awful things, but we decided there wasn't enough evidence to indict, and no reasonable prosecutor would even indict in a case like this. Basically saying that anyone who does decide to go ahead and try to indict her is an unreasonable, crazy person. So you're thinking about the way the FBI treats normal people not named Clinton or Bush or haven't been in the White House or don't have some special privileged status in society. Then, of course, the FBI treats those people completely differently. They will come up with any number of things that they can use to lock you away for decades, if necessary, even if it's some trifling little totally non-violent drug offense or something like that, or some totally made-up thing under the RICO Act where you bought and sold some stocks and they look into that and they find some pattern that shows you were involved in some sort of shady scam. And the next thing you know, you're spending hundreds of thousands on legal defense and then you're in prison. Apparently, you get different treatment if you're special. So I thought, well, what's with this FBI? Let's look a little bit more closely at this organization, which is clearly a political organization. The FBI kind of benefits from the same thing the Supreme Court does, is Americans believe this silliness about how, well, since the director of the FBI is appointed and not elected, they must be this good, non-political, conscientious organization. They do what's right. And that, of course, is complete nonsense.
All right, what are the origins of the FBI then? I think a lot of people would assume that it came about because there was a gap in existing law enforcement. People at the local level couldn't cope with crimes that went way beyond their jurisdiction. So in order to help coordinate among law enforcement agencies or to have an umbrella organization, we had the FBI, and this solved that problem. What's wrong with that? Is that a romantic pie-in-the-sky view of where the FBI came from?
Well, that's certainly what the FBI said. Paul Cantor, in his book Gilligan Unbound, talks about the X-Files, and in it contains a discussion of the FBI, specifically a 1959 movie called The FBI Story, which is kind of the gold standard of pro-FBI movies from that post-war period when everybody was worshiping all these federal institutions. And there's a discussion in it where the topic of why do we need the FBI comes up. And Cantor notes that the entire discussion then is just laid to rest with this sentence: the country's growing and crime will grow with it. That's it. And then for the rest of the movie, we don't have to worry about whether we need an FBI anymore. That's all. So it's comically simplistic in what is really presented to the general public. But of course, if you start asking questions and so on, the FBI will say there were bank robberies, and what if they went to a neighboring state? Or what if they kidnapped someone and took them to a neighboring state? And all that sort of thing. Of course, what they don't point out is that doesn't require this unified organization with agents and all of that. It's not like in Europe, I kidnap somebody in France and I go next door to Luxembourg or something. Oh, well, I guess I got away with it because now I'm beyond the French border, so no problem now. States can work together, organizations can work together. So if the FBI had to exist, it should have no function other than helping state police organizations share information and such. There is no need for this huge army of FBI agents to run around enforcing the 10,000 federal laws that have been written in the meantime.
Well, in fact, you even, I guess it's the Q&A over at the FBI's website. You reproduce the following Q and their A, which is the FBI a type of national police force? And the current answer is no. The FBI is a national security organization that works closely with many partners around the country and across the globe, to address the most serious security threats facing the nation. So these ain't kidnapping cases.
Yeah, they used to say they were a crime organization, like in the FBI story. But in recent years, they suddenly decide, oh, we're national security now. Maybe they decided that's more lucrative when it comes to lobbying Congress. But yeah, no more talk about kidnapping and chasing people across state lines now, unless they're terrorists. I guess it's just more prestigious then to send agents to Kazakhstan or whatever to track down terrorists. I thought we had national security organizations in the Department of Defense and such, but apparently not. Apparently they're all in the Department of Justice, and we need the FBI now to chase Al Qaeda.
I like the section on the FBI being created to compete with private agencies. At that time, government-run police had a terrible reputation, and people don't realize that. Throughout the 19th century, they had a terrible reputation for corruption. So that's worth knowing. That's the point that you make in that section. Secondly, you mentioned the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which in the American history textbook in every single American history class across the country is demonized for being terrible, and they were strike breakers and so on and on. But the only reason the Pinkertons existed was that the actual so-called police weren't doing anything when some workers, union workers, would go and commit violence against non-union workers or destroy property or whatever. The police that the company was paying taxes for would just stand there. And so, yeah, somebody's got to protect property rights. And yeah, I know that's not what you learned in school. And I'm sure there are some left libertarians who will hate the fact that I said this, that I'm supposed to stand with the oppressed workers or whatever. But no, if you're beating somebody to death with brickbats, I'm not standing with you. No.
Well, yes, let's be fair to the pro-FBI arguers, I suppose. The argument was that local police, they're basically servants of the local machine. You know, they kind of do the personal bidding of the mayor of Philadelphia or whatever. And they don't have a life outside of doing what helps the local Democratic Party machine or Republican Party machine. And since these cops lived among the general population, they were unwilling to enforce the law because that might make them unpopular with the local population and such. And so the idea was, okay, we're going to create this hyper-professional federal force, and they're not going to be beholden to any local politics. And they'll just be people like Elliot Ness, and they will just do their job properly, and politics will not affect them in any way. But of course, what happens then is, okay, we've created this agency that's totally separate from local politics, but now all this means is that it's at the beck and call of federal politicians now, and totally untouchable from any local interests. You can just send them into local communities and they can do whatever they want and just screw you if you're a local person who doesn't like the FBI. We now have this federal police force that's beyond anything that you can do. So it is above politics, but that just means that now they can do what they want, and you can't vote them out of office. You can't get to them in any way as a normal person. But yeah, as you noted, of course, if you went through a college program like I did, where you were taught by a bunch of leftists, and these leftists I happen to like, they were conscientious people and so on, but deeply ingrained in the general view of the Pinkertons and private law enforcement in this period was that, yeah, they were strike breakers. They were servants of this evil capitalist class. And so, of course, we had to create something like the FBI apart from the private detective agencies.
I want to read a little passage from your article here, talking again about the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons were primarily interested in property crime with actual victims, i.e. train robbing. The FBI, however, could be used to go after political enemies, protesters, supposed draft dodgers, and others who ran afoul of government regulations created to benefit the government itself. And that you say over time the FBI would crowd out the Pinkertons as a national police force. This was all to the good, according to many critics of the Pinkertons, who wanted a government-controlled national police force that could be used against the private sector rather than be controlled by it.
Part of the problem that the Pinkertons had, from their perspective, was that the courts were often very suspicious of them. Since the private detective agencies aren't part of the government, they didn't benefit from their kind of in relationship with the government the way that the FBI does and the way that modern police organizations do. So there was actually a seen disconnect between the courts. Judges saw themselves as sometimes adversaries of these private organizations. So if you were the Pinkertons, you just simply couldn't rush into this group of people, claim officer safety is paramount and just start shooting people. Because once you were brought to court, then later, how did you conduct yourself in this strike-breaking operation? If you shot a bunch of people, you might find yourself in jail. There wasn't any of this sovereign immunity stuff that modern police can claim. And so that's actually a great thing about private police. You're on much more even ground when dealing with them once you end up in court. So you would want a separate policing organization. You don't want somebody who basically has lunch with the judge all day long as the prosecutor or as the head of the FBI or whatever. If you look then at some of these accounts, you're often struck by how low the body counts are. I mean, in most cases, nobody's killed. The Pinkertons weren't directly involved in the Ludlow massacre, but here in Colorado, the Ludlow massacre is this big, big deal. They sent in the National Guard. It was a big strike-breaking operation. But that's all kind of mixed up together with these private organizations. You're supposed to believe that the Pinkertons were part of it and so on. But the body count from that was very, very low. In fact, it was tiny compared to something like Waco. And of course, it's the Waco siege. Nobody calls it the Waco massacre because I guess the FBI was in charge of that massacre. So if private capitalists are involved, it's a massacre. If the FBI kills 80 people, then it's just a siege.
Well, I'm going to link to your stuff again at tomwoods.com/719. And I got to keep a closer eye on what you're writing because it always makes for juicy episodes. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you very much.